There's other decoys, so to make it look different, we take and we tie them from the rear. And then instead of floating this way, they'll float this way. And you'll have one coming in to the other. And it makes it more realistic in the set.
We have a highland pond, behind me a Hudson River tributary, the Hudson River, a Hudson River cliff, a natural grassland, and agricultural land.
The Hudson River has many fascinating aspects to it. And tonight we'll look at some of the animals and the plant life that go along with the river and help to keep it alive. And we'll get into a motorboat and sneak into a duck blind at the Esopus Meadows. We'll hear from a couple of very serious men who take advantage of the river's sporting life. It all happens when we come back right here on the river. As we enter the second half of duck hunting season, the hunters are taking to their posts. Fred Farber, president of the Federated Sportsmen's Club of Ulster County, along with Marvin Cole, known as Dapper, the treasurer of the Waterfowl Association, and Fred's son Tucker are going to take us out on the Hudson in the Esopus Meadows to show us how a duck blind is put together and what it's like to be a dedicated waterfowl hunter. Dapper helped make this blind.
We usually start about the month of August, around the first part of August or the middle part of August, and we go out and we cut our small maple trees. They're about 3 inches in diameter, and they're about 16 foot long. And then we come out here, and we got 4 8-foot sawhorses, and we got planking, and we have a frame that's 6 by 12 for underneath this blind, and we drop that frame right in the water, and then we take and we start pushing these stakes down inside this frame. We line it up the way we want it, because every year we put it exactly the same spot. And then after we get them stakes in, we take and we run over to the lighthouse and we get a high water reading mark, and we add 30 inches to it, and we come back and we raise that distance above the water, and this way when we get a super high tide, we don't get no water in the blind. And then we go out and we find a place where we can get cedar trees, and we take and cut the cedar trees down and we bring them down here, and then we all get together, we come out and we put on the ends and the boat basin where you drive the boat in to conceal the boat, and then we bring the shack out and we put the shack up, and it all comes in different pieces, and we put it together with hooks and eyes and bolts, and then after we get the shack in, then we put the remaining cedar trees on the front of the blind, and the blind is then done.
And why use maple and cedar trees?
Maple is the easiest availability, really, and they don't split too much when you drive nails into them. And when we push these poles down, there's 4 of us that build it, and we just get on these poles and we push them right down in the muck. Down here it's all muck, up above it's all hard pan. They have to drive them in with sledgehammers or big drivers. They use usually a piece of pipe about this long with a cap on it, and they put that on the stake and drive them down in mud, but that's a real man killer to do it that way. So I'm getting too old for that stuff, so down here where you can push them in the mud, it's a little bit better. And then you take and you cross brace all these poles when you put them in. So you have a real sturdy blind, and as you can see, you can shake on it and it doesn't shake all over the place.
And just how much does it cost to build a duck blind?
Probably this blind right here there's probably about $400 or $500 into it, at least. But it's an expensive sport for the short amount of time that you have to harvest the ducks.
Besides making duck blinds, Dapper also spends a great deal of time creating decoys, which he says are very important when trying to attract ducks.
Well, ducks, they see these decoys and they think there's a family down there, and sometimes they come over and they're quacking, they're kind of lonely, and you answer them back with a call, and then they'll come in, and when they come in, that's when you can harvest the duck. And these here, They're made out of cork. It's a 4-inch cork. We buy it in sheets that's 18 inches wide, 36 inches long, 4 inches thick. And then I have patterns that I lay on the cork so I can get 6 of these decoys out of 1 sheet of cork. And if you don't use the patterns, you'll only end up with 5 because it's very slim line when you're cutting them out. And then I take these and I put them, I rasp all this out with a rasp, shape them. And then I take this cork and I put my saw, my radial arm saw down on, turn the motor down, and I have a jig I put these in and I run that through to open this back up so that I can put this insert of thin plywood in there so the tails don't break off. It makes the tails pretty sturdy. And then the heads, I have a hole bored down through here and through the keel, I glue this keel on. Then there's a big long screw that goes up in here and it holds onto this head. And you can make this head in any position you want. You can make it sideways. You can make it back further. You can make it looking over the shoulder like he's sleeping. Or you can have it straight. And then there's a little lead weight that we put on the bottom so to keep them upright when the water gets rough. And then we have this wire, heavy copper wire through here, and a decoy anchor cord fastened to that. And then we have this weight, which weighs approximately 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds, and you throw it in the water, and this decoy will set there and float according to the way the tide is going, sometimes with the wind. And there's other decoys, so to make it look different, we take and we tie them from the rear. And then instead of floating this way, they'll float this way. And you'll have one coming in to the other. And it makes it more realistic in the set. This here is a black duck here. And that's one of the finer eating ducks on the Hudson River, and they're very wary. And then we have the mallard duck. This one here, this is an old timer here. It's made out of refrigeration cork. The cork is much coarser, and it was 2-inch cork that we got out of an old refrigerator cooler, and we glued it together and carved it out. And there's no tail in this one here, insert. But this is supposedly to be a mallard drake. This one here is a Canadian goose, and I haven't made any of these yet because the cork is a lot thicker, but it's probably in the plans down the road to make some.
And over the years, Dapper says he's made quite a few decoys.
We probably got about, all told, probably 400 decoys, but you don't use them all at the same time. And this here is a brant. You can see it's like a small goose, only instead of having the white chops, it has the white on the neck. This is what they call the black brant, which flies down the Atlantic flyway. And these come down about usually October 19th, but this year they came down to the 26th of October. And fortunately, we missed them.
Different sounds attract different species. Tucker now will demonstrate how a duck caller works, as Dapper explains each call.
He's going to give you the feeding call, which is a little chatter that the ducks make when they're feeding, and other ones hear it, and they drop down and they feed with them. And then you have the hail call, or the comeback call, where the ducks is going overhead, and you want to try to turn them around and bring them back. And then you have the lonesome hen call. The hen is sitting out on the water, she's all alone, and she sees a duck fly over, and she'll start to call to bring company in. This is when a flock is going over, and there'll be some setting on the water, and they'll give them this call, the greeting call, to try to bring them down to get with them.
As we leave the duck blind, Fred Farber, president of the Federated Sportsmen's Club, has some helpful hints on what to wear when out on the Hudson.
One of the things I'd like to explain while we're in the boat here is you should never come out into the Hudson River without a life jacket like I have right here. This is a life jacket, and it zips up right in front of me here. And believe me, it'll keep you warm. Now, when you come on the Hudson in the fall of the year, you wear the proper type of clothing. You do not just wear summer type clothing because it gets very cold out here, and today we're just lucky the wind isn't blowing, but if the wind was blowing, I doubt if we'd be able to be out here this long. This is a very cold river, and it can chill you to the bone very quickly.
There are approximately 6 duck blinds on this side of the river.
This is what a blind looks like with their decoys, full decoys out. In a blind like this, you would set out your decoys first. Yes, this would be the most important feature. And believe me, this is a job in itself to set these decoys out, because each one has to be set out, and then if one tips over, you have to go out. If ice gets on them because it's cold, you have to go out and get the ice off them. You have a lot of work, and then you pick them up every night too, you do. So you have a lot of work just in handling the decoys. Plus, there are people that would want to take these decoys, so you must be careful that that doesn't happen. You've got a large investment right in decoys. Right here they've got all the geese in one area, and they've got the mallards in another area, and you've got black ducks in another area. Now we're going to go to another blind which has decoys, but I see some white decoys over there, so they might be snow geese. And that's another kind of goose that comes down the Hudson River that we hunt. The snow geese is the same as the blue geese or blue goose. It's just a different name.
And as we head back to shore, Fred tells us if anyone plans to join this group of dedicated waterfowl hunters, you may have to start saving.
To purchase a license and to purchase a proper gun, probably you're speaking of someplace in the neighborhood of $500 to $700 just for the gun and the license and ammunition. Now you'd have to have a canoe basically if you were doing it on a creek, so there's another $400 to $500. And of course that canoe would last you a long, long time. And then you have to get the proper clothing, which I would say would be $150 to $200 in clothing, just for the sport.
The sport of duck hunting is a lot of work, and it takes a lot of preparation. Dapper, who's been doing it since 1946, says it's all worth it.
It's just a relaxing sport, real relaxing. You come out here and it's just a peaceful, quiet place. There's no radios or TVs or nothing. It's just peace and quiet, tranquility.
They better have this guy. Oh, that's fun. What are we looking at, the white structure?
All the way down?
The animals and the fish life that inhabit the Hudson River Valley can be found at the Museum of Hudson Highlands in Cornwall-on-Hudson. There's a natural history wing to show us not only the contemporary, but the creatures that once were. Charles Keene is director of the museum.
What we've done here with our exhibit renovation is to divide the museum into the 7 habitat types that are most characteristic of the Hudson Highlands. In other words, we have a highland pond, behind me a Hudson River tributary, the Hudson River, a Hudson River cliff, a natural grassland, and agricultural land. The exhibits that we have in here are a little new and unique in that we have live animals and taxidermic mounts and models and preserved plant materials and artwork all in one habitat grouping. The live animals are constrained in such a way that they can't get at all of the taxidermic mounts and preserved material and destroy this stuff, but they don't appear to be in conventional cages either. In fact, in this Highland Pond over here, many of the animals that are in there are constrained basically by their own behavior. With all of the reptiles and the amphibians, they could get out of there if they really worked at it, but after we put them in there and they settle down, they don't really try to get out because they discover where the heaters are, and they're cold-blooded animals and they have to have heat, so they're very closely tied to the heaters. And then food comes on a regular basis, on schedule every day, and so pretty soon the animals just form their own natural territories and they remain right in that small spot. Most animals, especially reptiles and amphibians, have very small territories anyway, so that lends itself pretty easily to that type of habitat grouping. And then, of course, in the aquariums and in the grassland, the animals are constrained. The fish are in aquariums, and the birds, the sparrowhawk and the crow, are in cages that are of monofilament, like fishing line, so that it doesn't appear like it's a wire mesh cage.
One of the exhibits in particular is a fish tank filled with water and fish directly from the Hudson River.
Well, with fish, the water that they live in is a real critical parameter. And in fact, in the Hudson River tank, that's all Hudson River water. And we found that fish like white perch and striped bass will only survive in Hudson River water. What's unique about it, I really can't say. It's only very slightly saline, but the fish are really adapted to that type of water, and for whatever reason they do very well in Hudson River water, and they don't do very well at all in other types of water.
And Charles tells us why the river is so important and should be highlighted.
The Hudson River is by far the most valuable natural resource in this area. And although it's at the base of the Hudson Highlands, an awful lot of the wildlife that inhabits the Hudson Highlands depends in one way or another on the Hudson River. Probably even birds like owls that live way up in the Hudson Highlands probably at night hunt the shoreline of the Hudson River because there's just so much wildlife in that wetland habitat.
Here's an exhibit that shows a mature forest.
Two species of owls that we have here are the horned owl and the barred owl, and then there's a pileated woodpecker on the top of the hemlock tree in the foreground there. And then we have, as a background painting, a piece of work that Sue Gurney did for us that is representative of what a mature forest in this region looks like. As a matter of fact, mature forest is one of the more common habitat types along the Hudson River. And in the old days, there were a number of large Hudson River estates, and these estates protected the forest on their lands, and they were often of pretty vast acreage. So as it turns out, through these old Hudson River estates, the shoreline of the Hudson in some places has some very, very mature forest, or forest that hasn't been cut in probably 150 years or so.
This exhibit may look very familiar. It's called a Hudson River cliff.
Although the habitat is common, you'll notice as you drive through the Hudson Highlands, like on 9W from West Point to Cornwall, you'll see that there are a lot of very rocky, cliffy areas that look like this. So while the habitat is very common, the species that you see in this habitat grouping are not that common. The birds are peregrine falcons, birds that at one time nested on Hudson River cliffs all along the Hudson. In the 1940s, there were 8 pairs of peregrines on Hudson River cliffs. We also have rattlesnakes in here. Of course, they're not live. Again, they're epoxy models. At the top, you'll see that there's prickly pear cactus and blueberries. That little pile of sticks over there is a pack rat nest. A very common characteristic of cliffs is that they're very dry. So species like prickly pear cactus that you would never normally associate with the east are able to survive on these cliffs because the cliff is so steep that right after it rains, the water drains off of the cliff and then the sun comes out and dries it right out. So no matter how hard it rains, very shortly after the rainfall, you have drought conditions on the face of the cliff. Rattlesnakes are also species that are associated with very dry conditions, as is probably the pack rat that built that nest in the corner there. So anyway, this habitat is pretty conspicuous along the Hudson River, and any visitor should be able to pick this habitat out along the Hudson shorelines.
The natural grassland exhibit is one of the more elaborate in the new museum wing.
We did something a little different here, and what we did was to recreate a habitat type that was very common along the shoreline of the Hudson River 300 or 400 years ago when the Dutch first discovered this area. And this particular habitat, this natural grassland or prairie, as the French named them, was a fire-maintained habitat that the Indians were burning to preserve game populations like elk and the heath hen that you see in here, and also probably wild turkey. These dry, bushy bunch grasses that you see in the exhibit here, if you keep your eyes open while you're driving along the roadsides, you'll see that these types of grasses still occur all along the Hudson River. Mostly this little blue stem here, you see it in association a lot with red cedar. Well, anyway, the Indians had created or maintained relatively artificial conditions here to either attract these game animals or to make hunting them a lot easier. So anyway, this habitat type still occurs here in the Hudson Highlands, although it's nowhere near as abundant as it once was. As you go through Bear Mountain State Park, you'll see a lot of grassy areas that have this characteristic little blue stem in there. This was the grass that buffalo preferred above all others. We have several live animals in here that you can see. Of course, we have our crow walking around over there. Our sparrowhawk is in that monofilament cage there. In this this area that you can look into here, it's a dried up stream bed, and we have turtles in here. And we have all of the terrestrial turtles, the box turtle, wood turtle, and then we also have toads. And we set this up so that children can see these animals through this window here, small children, and then larger children can stand on the box, and then adults can just lean over the edge and they can look inside. And of course our instructors can reach in there and take the animals out for school classes. This is an ant colony here, and there's terrific amount of scientific detail in all of these. Ray Mendez was our exhibit designer, and he happens to be extremely knowledgeable about ants, so that if you were to take a close-up look at this ant colony, you can find the queen and you can find all the different stages of the eggs and the larvae in there. It's pretty accurate. This one over here is a mole, and you can see that the mole is eating an earthworm, and in the nest over here the mole has several other earthworms stored up. And then this one over here is a bumblebee nest, and you can see that it has the little honey pots that bumblebees keep to feed their young. This type of exhibit has an awful lot of detail in it. The more you look at it, the more you see.
As we conclude our visit with Charles Keene at the Museum of Hudson Highlands, we leave the newly completed Natural History Wing with a bit more knowledge about some of the animals, the plants, and the fish life that inhabit our valley surroundings. And Charles Keene says he hopes these new exhibits will perk the public interest.
What we're hoping is it will increase public awareness of the needs of wildlife in this area. In other words, the habitat that's necessary to sustain the wildlife that occurs in the Hudson Highlands.
Nobody ever got hurt learning a thing or two about some things we may not have known about beforehand. We hope you've enjoyed finding out about the creatures of the Hudson as much as we have. That was from Logbook 14. Tomorrow night we resume our regular On the River schedule with Logbook 60, the Hudson River Maritime Center's Cup Race, the 5th annual, the one that was postponed earlier in October because of that freak snowstorm. So join us tomorrow night at 6:30. That's right here on the river.